You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Hi, I'm Jay Farner, CEO of Quicken Loans, America's largest mortgage lender. Spring will be here soon, so if buying a new home is on your to-do list, right now is the time to call Quicken Loans. Learn about which mortgage options make sense for you and get a jump on your competition. With our exclusive Rate Shield approval, the low rate you lock today is protected for up to 90 days while you shop for your new home. With a Rate Shield approval, if rates go up, your low rate stays locked. But if rates go down, you get that new, even lower rate. Either way, you win. Talk to us today at 800-QUICKEN or go to rocketmortgage.com to take advantage. Here's another great reason to work with us. For a record 9 years in a row, J.D. Power has ranked Quicken Loans highest in the nation in customer satisfaction for primary mortgage origination. Again, to lock in today's low mortgage interest rate and get the security of our exclusive Rate Shield approval, call us today at 800-QUICKEN or go to rocketmortgage.com.
For J.D. Power award information, visit jdpower.com. Rate Shield approval only valid on certain 30-year fixed-rate loans. Call for cost information and conditions. Equal housing lender. License in all 50 states. NMLS number 3030.
Hi, welcome to the Subway ad for the new Sesame Ginger Glazed Chicken Signature Wrap. How would you like it?
I'll take a...
Sports announcer at home?
Yeah, how'd you...
We just know.
My wife picks up the new Signature Wrap. It's got double the rotisserie-style chicken mix with a sesame ginger glaze. She appears annoyed at me, but she shrugs it off. Those sweet and savory flavors are calling her name. She lifts the wrap and... she takes the bite! Incredible! And now she's closing the door on my... Subway, make it what you want.
Limited time only at participating restaurants. Double meat based on average 6-inch sub.
I'm little teapot, short and stout.
Here is my handle and here is my spout.
No, Dad, like this. When I get all steamed up, then I shout, tip me over and pour me out.
This is WWE superstar Roman Reigns. It only takes a moment to make a moment. Take time to be a dad today.
Visit fatherhood.gov, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Lone Conservative. Today, I have an amazing guest on for you today. He's someone that I've followed on Twitter for a while. He's someone whose pieces I've just started to read over the past month or 2 months. I originally knew him as an expert, amazing Twitter troll. And I have discovered over the past month or two that he is actually an amazing reporter for the DC Examiner, and he actually just broke a pretty good story today about this guy named Ian Bremmer who tweeted out a false Trump quote. And basically, I had to eat crow because I thought the Trump quote was real. Jerry waited for confirmation, but everyone at Lone Conservative loves him. Jerry Dunleavy. Jerry, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
So the first thing that I wanted to talk about today, so I know we originally established that we were going to talk about, the Trump investigation, and I do want to get into that because as I said to you before the podcast, the Russia investigation isn't something that I covered very much on the podcast. I covered it a little bit at first, and then my whole take was that it seemed as if the media was just posting information on repeat. Like, if there was a period change in any sort of leak, then they would report on it like it's some huge breaking story. So my whole rule for the podcast was until the Mueller report gets published, assuming, depending on what that says, I was just going to keep quiet. I wasn't going to waste my time on the Russia investigation. And now things are heating up. The Mueller report basically said no collusion, obstruction. Mueller punted the ball, which I have some issues with. I've expressed that on the podcast, but we can get into that if you want. And now it seems as if, as Lindsey Graham has said, they are investigating the investigators. But before we get into all of that, right now Trump is in Japan, and I don't know what he's doing there. I've seen him at a sumo match. That's about it. That seems like a very valuable use of foreign policy. But he's had some really bad takes about Joe Biden, about Kim Jong-un. He's kind of been praising this evil genocidal tyrant. And I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on these comments that Trump has been making about Kim Jong-un and about dictators in general, Putin, Xi Jinping, Erdogan. I mean, it kind of just, it's nonstop.
Yeah, I mean, he does seem to lean towards a bit of flattery there. And I don't particularly like seeing it. I think that the case of Kim Jong-un is not a good, like, it's not good to hear and it's not good to see because, to a certain extent, foreign policy is going to involve saying nice things about the person that you're negotiating with, but he definitely does go way beyond that. And Kim Jong-un is a uniquely bad guy. I mean, hundreds of thousands of North Koreans in gulags, trying to develop nuclear weapons, trying to develop missile technology that could deliver those nuclear weapons, potentially as far as, the United States, the West Coast. And I always tell people to remember as well the role that North Korea played in the death of American student Otto Warmbier as well. So North Korea is it's a serious adversary, and seeing Trump's comments, especially his comments about Biden and Kim Jong-un supposedly agreeing with some insults towards Biden. I mean, it's not good. It's not great to see that. I kind of when I see that, it kind of reminds me of like how it is with my friends. Like, I'm allowed to make fun of my friends, but if someone that's not my friend makes fun of my friends, like, we have a problem. And I kind of think that we should sort of treat this the same way when it comes to our adversaries and our sort of political adversaries versus foreign ones. We can kind of make fun of Joe Biden, but we shouldn't be like boosting or giving like a platform to like Kim Jong-un making fun of Joe Biden. So that's kind of where I come down on that.
Well, I've always been someone who's defended Trump when he brown noses Kim Jong-un to some extent. I think there's points where he's obviously gone over the line. But like you said, I'm a foreign policy realist. I saw that there were a bunch of right-wing figures that were getting angry at him the first time that he kind of started to negotiate with Kim Jong-un, and he was saying nice things about him and saying how great of a leader he is. And my whole position was, listen, you can tone it down a little bit, but at the end of the day, if it's so unlikely that you're going to make any headway with Kim Jong-un. But if you're going to try, you might as well, try. And I never understood the people who were just exceptionally angry at Trump just for trying, for saying nice things that really need to be said in negotiations. But like you said, it's getting to the point now where it's too far. Trump has too much of an affinity, in my opinion. He has too much of an affinity to say nice things about particularly bad people, even when those nice things, especially when those nice things aren't merited. And the fact now that he's dragging in Joe Biden, or he's giving Kim Jong-un praise for making fun of Joe Biden, like you said, it's that sibling kind of aspect where we can all make fun of Joe Biden, but the instant someone else makes fun of Joe Biden, at the very least a foreign tyrant, it's something that's a no-go.
Right.
So kind of expanding off of this, because that's something I really briefly wanted to cover. There was this dude, and I'm already blanking on his name. What was his name again? The guy.
Ian Bremmer?
Yeah, Ian Bremmer. So I am ashamed to say that I pounced on this really, really fast because I wanted to make a meme. I had an amazing Key and Peele meme. Okay. It was godly. But this guy, Ian Bremmer, tweets out, President Trump in Tokyo, quote, Kim Jong-un is smarter and would make a better president than sleepy Joe Biden. And the sad thing is, like, it's extreme for Trump, as you pointed out in the DMs, but also it's something feasibly that he'd say. Like, you could imagine it. And it came out, like, not 30 minutes, or not 30 minutes, like 3 hours later, that it was a fake quote, largely in thanks to you. What's your opinion on this whole thing? Because it seems to me as if it's this dude was spreading fake news, and he's now trying to weasel out of it by saying, oh, it was just satire. It was just satire.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he knew it wasn't true, and he put something out as if it was. Ian Bremmer is, he's listed on Time Magazine's website as their foreign affairs correspondent and their editor at large. So this is a blue check guy, a journalist that people go to for information. So tweeting something out with quote marks around it, to cause a big stir and then to say, see, I proved X, Y, Z. It's not something that journalists do. So I called him out. I mean, I didn't buy it right away. I was very skeptical. I said, look, I mean, if this is true, it's a big, propaganda win for Kim Jong-un. But if it's fabricated, which I suspected it was, then it's, this is the fake news type stuff that, deserves to be called out. And he tried to defend it. I, caught him sort of trying to weasel out of it in his replies and screenshotted some stuff. And he got mad and tried to reply to me and sort of clap back and ended up deleting all of his tweets. As I always say, delete your account next. But he won't. And this will probably just pass by. But yeah, stuff like this isn't good. It doesn't prove anything outside of just, the people believe stuff on Twitter. And that point doesn't need to be made, though, especially when it comes to serious foreign policy issues. It's really not good to spread disinformation about stuff like this, especially when you're like a trusted journalist. So I thought it deserved to be called out. I caught him doing it. He deleted his tweets. I wrote up a little article on it. We'll see if anything else happens, but it's not good.
I'm starting a movement to take away Bremer's blue check mark and to give it to Neon Taster, who
Yes, I can support this.
I need you to start tweeting out the hashtags, Jerry. This is a real movement in America that everyone wants to see. But to me, it was like a lot of people. I saw a lot of people saying like, "Oh, how could you fall for this? The media lies all the time. How could you just believe something you see on Twitter?" And to me, you kind of brought up the point. To me, it's different than. Do you know who Barry McCockiner is?
Sports talk radio Barry.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm online too much, but yeah.
It's basically, that he'll sometimes pose as fake journalists, like Ian Rappaport or whatever his name is, and tweet out fake sports news. Right. That's something that, like, if you fall for that, you're dumb. Because he's someone who, like, he doesn't have a blue check mark. You can check his handle. It's very obvious that he's a troll. With this guy, people are treating him the same way as they treat Sports Talk's Barry. They're treating it as if it's just some troll. But the difference between them is this is actually a verified dude. This is actually someone who is in the media. This is actually someone who I've never been. I mean, I heard of Ian Bremer vaguely before today, and I'd never heard anything bad about him. I saw he had a big following. I saw who he worked for. I saw the blue check mark. I'm like, okay, this has to be. And I learned the lesson never to pounce again like that. But I was like, this has to be somewhat reliable. And it's really. I mean, I don't know what it says about the state of media that a lot of journalists were retweeting this and covering this at first like it was some real event without doing any corroboration of their own.
Yeah, I mean, so I've only been doing the, reporter thing for a few months now, but I always want to see the original video, the original transcript. We've seen too many things go viral that just aren't true or are out of context. That I just recommend to everyone, find the video and watch it, see what the actual quote is. I never buy stuff like this, especially the quote that he had was such a bombshell if it was really true. But the fact that none of the traveling reporter pool that was with Trump in Japan was tweeting about this, just somehow Ian Bremer was the only one in the world that knew that Trump had said this. It just struck me as so bizarre. So I just recommend just always see the video for yourself and then make sure the video isn't itself out of context too. Always hunt down the original source and always, never trust any of this stuff because you can't trust someone just because they have a blue check.
And I think that's so important in this Twitter age where outrage I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before. Outrage culture is the norm on social media. And the instant you see something that makes you angry, the instant you see something that is not justified, the instant you see something that is wrong, you want to pounce on it and you immediately want to cover it. And you immediately want to kind of espouse your virtue. And for as wrong as Ian Bremmer is, I think it does teach some people, at least, to, even if it's a reliable media source, like you said, you got to verify for yourself. You can't just immediately let outrage take over and pounce on something that seems feasible. I mean, you have to think that if this was actually said, not only would the traveling press corps be covering it, but North Koreans would have a video of this up like within 30 seconds.
Oh yeah. I mean, like if this was real, it would have been everywhere immediately. It would have been the biggest thing happening. The fact that it was just Ian Bremmer, look, I was just like, this doesn't seem true. So yeah, I mean, just, read clues like that. And when you see one person tweeting some bombshell thing and no one else, a lot of skepticism.
No, it's, I don't know. Listen, all I know, as I said, is we're starting a campaign to take away Ian Bremmer's blue check and to give it to Neon Taster. This is a movement that everyone listening to this podcast should get behind. It's an important movement. It's an American movement. You just need to do it. But moving on kind of from this whole thing, that's really all I wanted to talk about with Trump in Japan. Nothing else that Trump has done in Japan has been notable aside from his comments to Kim Jong-un and the fact that
any incredible photographs that have emerged from the sumo wrestling match.
Oh, yes. That's how can I forget about that?
It's say whatever you want about his presidency, but it has given us just some truly incredible photos to just look back on and just remember when this is all over. Just truly incredible stuff. The orb, the sumo wrestling match, the fast food at the White House. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like these pictures are just, they like these photos deserve to be in a museum. Love him or hate him, these pictures are just incredible. So yeah, that's about as far as my analysis of the Japan trip goes, though.
The last thing I'll say is we just have to get an icon. I was going to bring up the orb. I'm glad you beat me to it. We have to get an iconic photo of him from every continent, right? So right now we have it from, I mean, I guess the Middle East is technically Asia, but people sometimes just call the Middle East its own little continent, so I'll count it. But we have one from the Middle East. We have one from that region. We have one now from Asia. We need like a really iconic photo like the orb now from Europe or something. So I don't know what that's going to be, but I think Trump needs to make it happen, especially if Boris Johnson over in England wins prime minister. I mean, that's English Trump we're talking about,
I have the one thing I can guarantee is weird pictures of Trump. Yes, there will be that. That is something that I can guarantee.
So moving on from this, now aside from the cultural significance of that sumo wrestler, which I'm very glad you brought up, I wanted to move on to something that you've actually been covering extensively in your short time as a reporter now.
Yeah.
And it's something that I read a few of your articles before the podcast. I would have prepared even more, but I told you I've been running around like a chicken with my head chopped off for this upcoming Media Research Center internship. But I read probably, I think you had like 3 pieces that I read on it. And they were all very well written, and it seems like you really know your way around the Trump-Russia stuff. The only other person who I know who seems to know their way around it as well as you do was Amber Athey when I interviewed her on my old show. I just wanted to know right now what you make of how the Trump investigation is proceeding and kind of tell people what's going on. Because I feel that ever since the Mueller report dropped, a lot of people on the right have kind of lost interest. They heard no collusion. They heard from Trump, at least, no obstruction. And now they've kind of moved on. But I think it's important from what I've read from you that we actually stay on this issue because it seems as if now they're investigating political motive in the beginning of the investigation.
Yeah. So let me touch on just briefly, because I think it's useful to touch on kind of what Mueller concluded and then to touch on what Attorney General Barr and Trump and Lindsey Graham and all these people are trying to do now. So Mueller concluded that, Trump there was no criminal collusion between Trump and Russia. Mueller did conclude that Russia had interfered in the election. They had done so through cyber attacks. The GRU, which is Russia's military intelligence wing, Mueller concluded, was involved in the hacking of emails from Clinton and DNC, providing them through cutouts to WikiLeaks, who then distributed them broadly during the campaign, and that Russia was also involved in social media disinformation campaigns as well through the Internet Research Agency. So different sort of ways that Russia was trying to interfere in the election, but Mueller didn't find any sort of criminal collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia or any Americans and Russia. So that's kind of where things were. Now, this investigation into the investigators. Republicans have a lot of concerns about the way that the investigation got started. There's questions about whether it really started at the end of July 2016, as the FBI says. They say that they launched their counterintelligence investigation into Trump after an Australian diplomat named Alexander Downer told them that a Trump foreign policy aide named George Papadopoulos had told him in a bar that another guy, supposedly connected to Russia, named Joseph Mifsud, had told Papadopoulos that Russia had some sort of damaging information on Hillary Clinton. So kind of a very circuitous and roundabout way, but supposedly all of that is what started the investigation. People have questions. Republicans have a lot of questions about whether the investigation really started then, or if the FBI or the CIA or whatever were looking into Trump earlier than that. There's also, and this is probably what people know more about, there's also a lot of questions and concerns about the way that this dossier put together by British ex-spy Christopher Steele, the way that this dossier was used. Basically, if you read the dossier, which I've read more times than I would like to say, because I'm trying to figure out where is this guy getting this stuff from, what's true, what's false, and all of that. And you read it, and it makes really, really big claims, like about Trump and Putin having long-standing relationships, and it talks about back channels, and it talks about Steele supposedly having like Kremlin insiders telling him all sorts of stuff. Lots of big claims about Trump's involvement with Russia and other people associated with their involvement with Russia. And basically nothing that was in the dossier, as far as I can tell, nothing really panned out. I'm not saying that all of it is false, because I just don't know. But when you read the Mueller report, you're not seeing it verifying what was being claimed in the Steele dossier. So the question is, this dossier, what did the FBI actually try to verify before they used it? Christopher Steele was hired by Fusion GPS, which in turn was being funded by the Clinton campaign, the DNC, through a law firm called Perkins Coie. So Steele was being paid essentially through a couple of circuitous ways, the Clinton campaign. So what did the FBI do to verify whether this opposition research that was being funded by the other presidential campaign, what did they do to verify whether it was true or not before using it to obtain surveillance against Trump members? And so far, it seems like the answer is they didn't really do very much.
Yeah. It seems to me, from what I've been reading and from what I've been hearing, and which is very little aside from your articles, and I know you can't really give that much of an opinion on this, which I respect, because I know you want to remain objective in your coverage of this whole thing. But just what it sounds like to me is that these agencies were, and this isn't, by the way, whenever you criticize the FBI or the CIA, it seems as if the left comes out in full force to act as if you are condemning, you are castigating every single foot soldier in the FBI, every single agent, when in fact, for me at least, I'm just criticizing the leadership. But it seems to me as if the leadership in these agencies, specifically the FBI, were politicized in a way. I mean, disregarding Strzok and Page for a second, from what I know, and tell me if I'm wrong here, from what I know of the FISA reports, it seems as if that upon every FISA renewal, from what we see or from what we know right now, the FBI just kept on producing either the Steele dossier again or kept on producing basically variations on the Steele dossier. Like, I remember reading something once about how what they used as corroboration for the Steele dossier in the FISA hearing was a Yahoo News article on stuff that was in the Steele dossier, but what they didn't tell the courts was that the Yahoo News article, without expressly stating it, was based on specifically the Steele dossier. So it seems to me like they did as much as they could to prolong their surveillance or to prolong their investigation as much as they possibly could. And to me, it just sounds like everything was really politicized to a point. I mean, I like I said, I'm not asking you to say whether you do think or don't think that it happened for sure, but do you think that that's a possibility?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I mean, so there are a lot of kind of odd things about the FISA application and the process that it was done that we're slowly learning bit by bit. I mean, what we have known for a while is that when the FISA application was made, they do not say that, a lot of this information is coming from a guy who is being paid, through being paid by the Clinton campaign, essentially. I mean, he's working for Fusion GPS, which was getting funding from the Clinton campaign through a law firm. For all intents and purposes, he was being paid, by the Clinton campaign. And different information has recently emerged that shows that, yes, Christopher Steele knew that he was working for the Clinton campaign and that the Clinton campaign had maybe told him that they wanted the information out before the election. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that probably should be put into a surveillance application. The fact that the information is coming from a person or is being paid for by a person who stands to directly benefit from it, right? I mean, anything that hurts Trump helps Clinton, and it would be the same way around the other way. So if you're targeting Trump, but the information is coming through some way, shape, or form from the Clinton campaign, it's a pretty important thing to mention, and it's really not mentioned in the application. They do say that there might be some motivation of some kind, but I mean, everybody's motivated politically when it comes to a presidential election. I mean, everyone has an opinion one way or the other, but not everyone is being paid by the Clinton campaign. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that is something that we've known for a while. We are learning new things now as some of these people start to talk, some of the people that were involved start to give interviews, and as some of their congressional transcripts start to get released, we see that this was handled in a really, really, really unusual way. The application had the personal involvement of people all the way at the top. Things were done out of the normal order that applications are normally approved in. And so it's very odd. A lot of people had their fingers on it. Comey, Jim Comey, Sally Yates, Andrew McCabe, former FBI General Counsel Jim Baker, all of them seem to have a direct interest and approval of the application to surveil Carter Page. So there was a lot of high-level involvement, but the more that we look at it and the more that we learn, it doesn't really look like any sort of verification was done of any of these big, bold claims that were made in the dossier before using it in front of a court. So some of this stuff's probably going to come out pretty soon when the DOJ's Inspector General releases a report, either this month or next month. But there are other investigations that are gearing up as well now too. So,
and I know there's a lot of people in the bureaucracy that are saying, "Oh, you can't really, like, because Trump gave, from my knowledge, he gave Barr permission to declassify things that regarded to how the investigation started. And a lot of these people in the bureaucracy, a lot of these intel people are saying, no, you can't declassify this. It'll endanger intelligence resources. It'll expose things that shouldn't be exposed to the public, blah, 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 blah. And my whole response to that is I don't have much sympathy. I mean, I truly, unless it's going to get someone killed, which I really can't foresee, and I'm sure if Barr foresees that, Barr's not a monster, I'm sure he'll keep it redacted. But overall, I don't have much sympathy for that perspective. I mean, if you didn't want intel to be exposed to the public, if you didn't want intelligence resources to be exposed to the public, then you shouldn't have, to me at least, you shouldn't have abused your power. You shouldn't have become a political tool. You should have remained an objective arbiter of what is supposed to be lawful truth. And by the way, before anyone tries to call me a hypocrite, I literally wrote an article for Lone Conservative when WikiLeaks was leaking things from Hillary Clinton's emails and from John Podesta's emails and the DNC, and that was largely in favor of Trump. I was someone who wrote an article castigating WikiLeaks, saying don't trust them now that they're supposedly on our side. Not only is that hypocritical, but they are also, the WikiLeaks, beyond the possibility that they are a Russian tool, they are people that have no boundaries. They are people, Julian, I quoted Julian, a book about Julian Assange, where apparently he was totally okay with leaking information that would have gotten undercover people or people in deep enemy territory killed. And not only that, but they frequently expose and publish private information that really has no merit or has no holding on the point they're trying to prove. So I was someone who wrote about WikiLeaks when it was favoring the right. Don't, like, beware of them. Don't be in favor of them just because they're on our side, quote unquote, for right now. So I'm consistent on this issue. I'm someone who's called out the right for their hypocrisy before. But for this, as I said, I have no sympathy for the people in the bureaucracy who abuse their power, who abuse their standing, who abuse the agency, who turned it into something that it was never meant to be, and are now complaining and whining and moaning at Trump, saying what he's doing is just evil and tyrannical, that he's possibly going to devalue the whole agency, that he's possibly going to expose, again, their intelligence assets, that he's going to, I don't know what they're exactly accusing him of now. They accuse him of so many things, but I know those are some of the fundamental accusations. And it's just absolutely, I don't know how anyone could possibly have sympathy for that unless they're ideologically blinded.
So, I mean, you definitely don't want to be in a position where you're putting sources in danger or anything like that, because human intelligence sources are really valuable. I don't know where this accusation is coming from. I mean, I haven't really seen an indication that human sources are going to be targeted by what Barr is doing here. So a lot of this seems like it might be narrative setting from people that don't want some of this stuff declassified.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, putting people's lives in danger would be bad. I also haven't seen an indication that that's what Barr plans on doing at all. So an interesting story that sort of has emerged is when we talk about sources, right? Is back in 2017, there was a Washington Post article that seemed to be getting its sourcing from current or former CIA people, and it seemed like including John Brennan. And it was a story about how the CIA supposedly has a source very close to the Kremlin or in the Kremlin or high up in the Kremlin who had personal knowledge about Putin and Putin's thinking. And this source that the CIA allegedly had cultivated was a source that was able to tell the U.S. that, Putin was personally involved in the election interference effort and that he wanted Trump to win and all this stuff. Now, that source and that story about that source was leaked to the media from people with the CIA, apparently, potentially even John Brennan, because there's details about his involvement with it and how he would hand deliver like letters that had this person's intelligence in it directly to President Obama and all this different stuff. So this source was sort of revealed, not their identity, but definitely details about them was revealed a couple of years ago. And right when the day after Trump announced this declassification effort last week, a news story came out. I think this time in the New York Times about this source again, about how now this source's life is going to be in danger because of Trump's declassification effort and all this different stuff. So I tell everyone these stories, you don't know what the motivations are of these different leaks, and there's a lot of narrative setting that's going on here. If this source and this source's life is so important, why was their identity being leaked 2 years ago to the Washington Post? Well, at that time it was useful because Trump was very skeptical of Russia's involvement and Putin's involvement in the election interference efforts. So leaking that story helped, make it clear that, look, Russia was involved. Okay, I mean, maybe it was important for people to know that, but you also, revealed that the U.S. has some, high-profile source and revealed details about this person. And now this source is being used again to say that Trump's declassification effort is going to put them in danger. It seems like whoever this source is, they're kind of being used to set some narratives. And so, it's something to keep in mind when you read these stories, is that there are people that are, this investigation of the investigators, these people who are going to be investigated, have knowledge that it seems like they might be leaking on occasion to help set some narratives. So there's going to be a lot of that, I think, in the coming days and weeks. And it's just something to keep in mind, that you never necessarily know the motivations of these leaks and these leakers.
Yeah, exactly right. And by the way, I do want to clarify a prior comment. By the way, I've been up for like 2 days straight. So if I said something that necessarily wasn't correct, I don't think it was human resources as much. I know there's one person that's concerned, or McCabe, or I forget whoever. I've been up for like 2 days straight. So if I put too much emphasis on the fact that there are intel officials that are claiming that human resources are going to be exposed, that's my bad. I did know about that one story where they're talking about the one Russian asset, but I more so meant that there are intel officials complaining about classified information being revealed, about things being revealed that the American public shouldn't know and doesn't need to know and will endanger future investigations. So, like I said, if someone's life is in danger, like this Russian asset that is being leaked about, then I am absolutely sure Barr will keep his name redacted. But if it's something that endangers some sort of investigation that isn't life-threatening, if it's something that is revealed of this classified information that makes you not look so good, then I have little sympathy for that. I think there are a lot of these people that brought it on themselves. And the fact to me that as of right now, Barr, as you said, these people seem to be leaking sensitive details themselves to try and establish a doomsday narrative. Barr has not revealed, to the best of my knowledge, or yours, this Russian source, nor does he intend to. And the fact that Brennan is further acknowledging its existence, and whether he would like that or would like it or not, or whether he believes it or not, is giving slow but tiny details about this guy for each little leak he makes. He is endangering his own source. Barr has done nothing. Talking about the fact that, Barr could feasibly do X with this new power. Yeah, but that doesn't mean he's going to do it. Barr's an experienced attorney. He's an experienced lawman. I doubt he's going to do anything that puts a serious investigation in danger, that puts someone's life in danger, that puts a U.S. asset in danger. He's not Julian Assange. So that's what I meant before. So I'm sorry if I had any inaccuracies there. But, I mean, how do you see... Again, I'm not trying to ask for your political opinion. This is more of, as you cover the story and as you've personally kind of seen how things have developed and things have kind of started to leak more and more now, do you think that some of these bureaucrats, or nervous.
I do. I think it's interesting. There's a focus now on James Comey, on James Clapper, on John Brennan, and sort of their differing involvements in the investigation, what they each thought about the dossier, ways that they may have tried to use the dossier, whether the dossier, whether any of them tried to push for it to be included in the official intelligence community assessment on Russian interference. I mean, there's a lot of these questions here. There's competing leaks. It seems perhaps from these different camps, it seems like they might be pointing fingers at each other. There's talk that there are emails that exist that show that supposedly there's an email from James Comey that says that it may have been Brennan or Clapper that wanted the dossier included in the intelligence assessment. There's these different competing leaks right now. My guess on what we're going to get to see is I think we're going to get to see a lot more emails. We're going to get to see a lot more texts. We're going to get to see more information just about the way that people were making these decisions. And I think what people should be interested in is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court is that court that you send FISA applications to, and it approves hundreds and hundreds of these every year. It's sort of a black box. We don't really know very much about the decision-making process. We know a lot of details about one application, this high-profile Carter Page one. And the one that we have a lot of details about, a lot of things were done in weird ways and probably not good ways. So if we learn more about that, if we learn more about that process, I think that's important. People make arguments that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court is something necessary. But with any of these things, these things need to be being done the right way, without abuse, without corruption. And there's questions about whether, this was done the right way. So I think we're going to learn a lot more. We've learned a lot over the last couple of years. We've learned a bunch in the last couple of weeks, especially as some of these people have started to talk and give interviews. I highly encourage anyone and everyone to go and check out interviews that Jim Baker, who is the former FBI general counsel, gave about his handling of the FISA application. He simultaneously claimed that they took the dossier. He actually borrowed this line. He said that they took the dossier seriously, but not literally. And yet they used the claims in the dossier to obtain a surveillance warrant against a U.S. citizen. So it's kind of an odd thing to do with something that you're taking seriously, but not literally, is to print it at times word for word in a FISA application that you're sending to the court and claiming is verified. So, I think we're going to learn a lot more, and it's interesting.
Seriously, but not literally also doesn't sound like an applicable standard for obtaining a warrant.
It's not a great standard. Listening to his interviews where he said that he simultaneously tries to walk the road of, that we did our due diligence and this, that, and the other thing, but won't actually say what, if anything, was ever verified before they used it. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see the line that he's trying to walk, and you see that from a lot of the people that were involved. And I think just there is just a lot of evidence that the dossier was handled in a really bizarre way. It was floating around in the media. It was floating around all over the government. It wasn't really verified before it was used, and that's an issue.
Well, we'll see how it turns out. I'm actually kind of excited because now things are starting to heat up again. It seems I am ready for Lindsay 2.0 to start going after some people who deserve it. So we'll see what happens. But that was good coverage, and I appreciate it because if I hadn't had you on, half the stuff that you said, 75% of the stuff that you said, I would have known. And I feel, I mean, I know like 3 people, which is amazing for me, but 3 people who exclusively listen to this show because they're not really political. So I know they wouldn't have known that either. So it's really good that I had you on to discuss this. And it kind of brings us into the last issue that I wanted to talk about with you. I think you just wrote a story on it. It's about this guy named John Walker Lind. He was known as the American Taliban, possibly involved in the death of a CIA agent in, 2002?
2001.
2001. And he's being released. I need to have you on this show more often. You're a good date fact checker. I'm like always getting dates wrong by like a year or two. But he's being released from prison after being serving for 18 years. He was originally supposed to serve apparently 22 years. At his original, from what I read, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding was when he was originally being sentenced like 18 years ago, he said, "Oh, I had no idea the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, blah, 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 were so bad. I didn't know what I was getting into, et cetera, et cetera." And then 14 or 15 years into his sentence, this dude, I'm only laughing because it's just so morbid. It's so evil that this guy can flip from, "Oh, I didn't know really what I was getting into," to, "Oh yeah, ISIS is pretty cool. Al-Qaeda is pretty cool. Taliban's pretty awesome." I mean, this dude has shown no signs of reform in the slightest. And I know that it's against American jurisprudence to further detain this guy, like past the 22-year limit, since that was his sentence, for things that, or for sentiments that he's expressing without direct action or without direct calls to action, it seems. But they're releasing him early. They're releasing him after 18 years in prison. I mean, what is this? Why are they releasing this dude early? It seems like I'd want him to serve out his sentence.
There's a lot of questions about that. I think that the real problem, I mean, it is a real problem, the way that we don't have a good system in place right now for dealing with people when they're in prison, becoming radicalized or staying radicalized. We don't have a way of really de-radicalizing people. We also don't have a good plan for what's going to happen when these people get out. John Walker Lind's not the only one that's is going to get released from prison here. And I think a big part of the problem with John Walker Lind was the sentence that he got to begin with. And if you'll let me, he's known as the American Taliban. And the more that I've learned about this, and the more that I've read, and the more that I've gone back and checked out his original statements to a freelance journalist right after his capture. And when I read the statements that he gave to the FBI back in like 2001, 2002, you see that American Al-Qaeda might be more accurate than American Taliban. When he went overseas when he was young, about 20 years old, and when he went to Afghanistan, he went and joined an Al-Qaeda training camp called Al-Farouk in Afghanistan. And it was there that he got all sorts of weapons training and all of this different stuff. He met Osama bin Laden a number of times, apparently, who visited the camp. Osama bin Laden supposedly thanked him personally for joining the jihad, all of this different stuff. And he was... John Walker Lind was aware, apparently, that Al-Qaeda had sent operatives overseas, potentially to the United States, to carry out attacks. It doesn't look like he had any foreknowledge specifically of 9/11, but he knew that Al-Qaeda was setting out to carry out various attacks and that sort of thing. And John Walker Lind was given a choice about what he would do once he left this training camp. And what he decided to do is to go and fight on the front lines, alongside the Taliban. So he was sort of part of a foreign fighter contingent that worked alongside the Taliban. So sort of Al-Qaeda, sort of Taliban. And it kind of shows that during that time, and arguably still today, but definitely during that time, the line between what Al-Qaeda was doing, the Taliban was doing, they were operationally were working with each other quite closely. So long story short, John Walker Lind is over there in Afghanistan in 2001, gets captured when the U.S. invades, gets captured by the Northern Alliance, which is working with the U.S., gets brought to a prison called Kala Jangi, back in November of 2001. And a CIA officer named Mike Spann interviews him, trying to figure out where he's from, who he is, what he's doing there. And John Walker Lindh won't tell him anything. Won't say anything, won't give him anything, won't tell him anything. Shortly after that, the prisoners, Taliban and Al-Qaeda prisoners, were being held there. Giant uprising. Apparently they had snuck in weapons, they had snuck in grenades, and all of this different stuff. Big uprising happens, and Mike Spann gets killed. He's the first American to get killed in the war on terrorism. First American to get killed in Afghanistan. And there's just a lot of evidence that John Walker Lindh he was involved with this group. He was there for the uprising. People think, and there's evidence that shows that he was aware that this uprising was going to happen. And he didn't tell his fellow Americans that, what was coming down, and an American gets killed. So there's just a lot of questions about his sentence to begin with, whether he really only should have been sentenced to 20 years, because he was charged with a whole slew of things. But in the end, pled out just to basically join the Taliban and carrying a weapon. But he wasn't charged with treason. He wasn't charged with his involvement with Al-Qaeda. He wasn't charged with, being involved in Mike Spann's death or anything like that. So the real crux of the problem here is probably that he was undercharged to begin with. And it's a real shame.
That's treason. We wouldn't take that. Excuse my language. We wouldn't take that shit if he were fighting for Spetsnaz. We wouldn't take that shit if he were fighting for Russia, if he were fighting for China. But for some reason, we're going to take that shit because he was fighting for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't know what the official policy is right now, but my whole opinion is the instant that an American joins a terror cell and goes overseas to try and kill Americans and American allies for that terror cell, their United States citizenship should be revoked. They are now an enemy combatant. And the fact that even if his United States citizenship isn't revoked, even if he's not, treated as an enemy combatant in court, that's treason. That's outright treason. I don't know why. Do you have any idea why they undersentenced him so bad? It seems really ridiculous. Did he have good lawyers? What?
There are a lot of questions about that. Now, by the way, I get the feeling of wanting to strip people of their citizenship, but when you do that, you I think that there is this big, this is going to happen with the Hoda case as well. She's quote unquote known as the ISIS bride. Mm-hmm. And right now there's this fight about whether she is or is not a U.S. citizen. I think if you want real justice, we're going to have to figure out a way to handle all of the foreign fighters that have gone over and joined ISIS or joined whatever, because this is going to continue to happen. And if you strip someone of their citizenship and just don't let them back in the U.S., is that really justice? Or do you treat them the way that you should treat, that you would treat a U.S. citizen who has gone to fight for the enemy and charge them with all the applicable things, aiding and abetting and possibly treason and all this stuff. So this is a problem that we're going to have to face, because there are a number of Americans that joined ISIS that are kind of languishing right now that we have to figure out what to do with. And it's going to continue to happen in the future. I don't have inside knowledge on what happened with the John Walker Lindh case to begin with. John Ashcroft, who was the Attorney General at the time, made a lot of big promises about everything he was going to charge John Walker Lindh with. Talked about how he was going to be life in prison and all this different stuff. And the U.S. backed away from a lot of that, despite pretty good evidence that John Walker Lindh wasn't just, fighting alongside the Taliban, but was involved with Al-Qaeda and importantly stuck with them after 9/11, right? Stuck around to continue to fight Americans even after 9/11 had happened. Not that you could really excuse it before 9/11, because you look at what Al-Qaeda had done before then. They, the Khobar Towers bombing and the embassy bombings and the bombing of the USS Cole. So, this is already pretty well known that Al-Qaeda was bad news. but to stick around even after 9/11. And when you're given a chance to talk, when you're talking to an American, Mike Spann, who's asking you what's going on, and you still won't talk, you still won't say anything, you stay silent, and then a big prison uprising happens and an American gets killed. It's pretty serious stuff. And, I had the chance to talk to Mike Spann's dad, to interview him, and to also interview Mike Spann's daughter, who was just 9 at the time. And it's interesting to hear, to hear from the family about it. It's a case that a lot of people have forgotten about, but I'm trying to make people remember, especially with him, with John Walker Lynn being released last Thursday, especially with it being Memorial Day just a few days later. I think it's a case that people have forgotten, but maybe shouldn't.
And I'm glad I have you on the podcast right now to remind people. It's something that I think is really crucial to remember. My whole thing is the only reason I think that people denounce their citizenship, that they shouldn't be considered U.S. citizens anymore when they join an enemy combatant, especially to the degree of ISIS, where they happily behead American citizens and where they'll kill as many American citizens as possible. I think it's by simply joining these groups, you denounce your citizenship. They not only hate American values, they hate America. They basically think America is Satan. I would think that by joining this group, you do some sort of denouncement of your former Western ways, of your former U.S. ways, of your U.S. citizenship. And I think you treat these people who officially join and start killing Americans, citizens and soldiers, you treat them as an enemy combatant. If they're on the battlefield and they're fighting your soldiers, you gun them down just like you would any other combatant. And if there's a prisoner, which it's rare, I would assume, with groups specifically as radical as ISIS, a group that's so radical that even Al-Qaeda has kind of, at least in the past, backed away a little bit from them, which should tell you how radical you are. But especially when there's groups like ISIS, I mean, where there are prisoners, you try them how you would any other ISIS prisoner, which how I assume it's done, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but how I've always gathered it's done is it's either some sort of military tribunal or it's some sort of international court. Depending on whether these people in ISIS are citizens of what countries. Like I've always gathered that, and again, it could be wrong, but I've always gathered that, like, for say an ISIS fighter is a citizen of Pakistan and they're still a citizen of Pakistan, then Pakistan would try them, assuming it's not a tribunal or an international court. But you try these people how you do any other war criminal. You try these people on the international stage or with military tribunals. I don't think you necessarily, this is just my opinion, and I could very well be wrong. That's not something that I think about very often. But I don't think that they need to be a U.S. citizen to face some sort of justice, assuming they're captured and not gunned down on the battlefield.
Oh, yeah. So what you're bringing up is interesting, because right now there's actually not a particularly good plan for dealing with a lot of these issues. Like, there are hundreds and hundreds of foreign ISIS fighters, for instance, from a ton of different countries that are over in Syria right now, being held by various different forces, and there isn't a good plan about what to do with them. Actually, right now, the U.S. is trying to extradite. This is just an example. The U.S. is trying to extradite, bring to the U.S. For charges 2 British members of ISIS. There were originally 4 of them, and they were kind of known in British media and in American media as the Beatles. These 4 British guys that went and joined ISIS, and they were behind some of the more dramatic executions. I think that they were involved with the the beheading of James Foley, for instance, the journalist, way back in the day, sort of that famous depiction of a journalist getting beheaded by ISIS a few years back. And the U.S. right now is working to bring the two of them, well, one of them, because there were originally 4. One was killed, I believe, in an airstrike. One is imprisoned in Turkey. And then 2 of them are sort of just over in Syria right now, I think. And the U.S. is working to bring them here to try them. So there isn't really a big plan for how to handle all of these. It's why I'm trying to write about these stories, because there isn't some big coordinated plan. about what we're going to do with all these people and what we're going to do with them in the future whenever people join terrorist groups. So it is still a big open debate right now about what to do and whether our justice system is ready to handle all of it. It's a big debate right now, and there's not a lot of good answers.
And that sounds like most debates right now, sadly.
You're not wrong.
But with that being said, I'm sad to say this. If I had a soundboard, I'd play some sad music. But the podcast has come to an end. We've run out of time. Jerry, thank you so much for coming on, dude. This has been a blast.
Hey, thanks for having me on, and big fan of you and all the lone conservative writers and everything like that. So it's cool to be on. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, but especially me. Like you're especially a fan of me, right?
Well, of course.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Otherwise, I would have had to end the call right now. But where can people find you if they want to hear more from you? And are there any projects that you're working on right now? Any stories that you kind of want people to be on the lookout for?
Sure. Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter, obviously, at Jerry Dunleavy, and check out my author page at the Washington Examiner. I'm a writer there, reporter there. I do a lot of investigation stuff, Department of Justice stuff, and I try to write as much as I can about things like the John Walker Lind issue and trying to keep American heroes like Mike Spann at the forefront of people's memories. So I try and write about as much of that stuff as I can. So you can follow me at Jerry Dunleavy on Twitter. Check out my author page at the Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com/Jerry Dunleavy, I think. So,
and guys, I urge you all to do so. His pieces, again, last minute preparation for the podcast. I'm sorry, Jerry, but from the pieces that I've read and from the work that I've seen from him, it is really good. It is really worth your time. It's something that it's really digestible and really easy to kind of. He goes over complex events like this Russia stuff, and it makes it rather easy to understand. So I urge you all to go follow him or go look at his author page at the Washington Examiner, and especially go follow him on Twitter because he's hilarious and he owns some annoying people. so that
high praise. That is the highest praise you could ever ask for.
You've been praised by me, which is, you should ask everyone at Lone Conservative, a rare occurrence. Usually I am the one, me getting praised. So again, thank you so much for coming on. And guys, this has been The Lone Conservative. Make sure to tune in this Friday for a new episode. No idea who we're having on. Maybe it'll be a solo episode. I know some of you have been craving that recently. But until then, have an amazing week. And I'll see you then.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.